picture this. You're a middle-aged, just deeply exhausted farmer standing in a filthy courtyard. Right. And you've spent, literally the last 10 years of your life watching your beloved countryside be systematically burned to the ground.
Year after year.
Exactly. Your family is hungry. The politicians in the city are lying to you constantly. And the gods, well, the gods are just completely silent.
They've totally abandoned the chat, so to speak.
Yeah. So out of sheer, unadulterated desperation, you go out and procure a giant dung beetle from Mount Etna.
As one does.
Right. You lock it in a stable, you force-feed it this diet of absolute refuse until it grows to monstrous proportions. You saddle it like a horse, and then you prepare to fly it into the sky to just scream at the universe.
It is, hands down, one of the most visceral, absurd, and I'd say politically charged opening images in all of classical literature.
It really is.
We are, of course, talking about the opening scene of Aristophanes' comedy Peace, which was first performed in Athens back in 421 BCE.
And what we are doing today for this deep dive is taking that specific, highly scatological, wildly chaotic play and, well, we're running it through a highly rigorous analytical lens.
A very rigorous lens, yeah.
Because we've got a fascinating stack of sources to work through today. We're combining historical context, systemic functional linguistics.
Getting deep into the Greek grammar.
Oh yeah, getting super nerdy with it.
Yeah.
And we're pairing all of that with Old and New Testament theology.
It's quite the mix.
It is, because our mission today is to figure out how this 2,400-year-old cry for an end to war actually serves as a cultural shadow. We really want to understand how a pagan comedy about a giant insect can act as a foil that points us and you, the listener, toward the substance of the true Prince of Peace.
Which is a beautiful contrast to explore.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The goal is to deepen our Christian faith and give us a richer, much more profound appreciation for what the biblical concept of shalom really requires in our daily lives.
And to even begin to appreciate the theology of this text, we really have to inhabit the nightmare that Aristophanes and his audience were living through.
Yeah, paint that picture for us.
So we are in the final days of what historians call the Archidamian War. This is the first brutal decade of the Peloponnesian War.
The big one.
The big one. Athens, which is the naval superpower leading the Delian League, is locked in this absolute death struggle with Sparta, which is the apex land power leading the Peloponnesian League.
And the strategy that the Athenian leader, Pericles, initiated, it fundamentally altered the whole psychological and physical landscape of the city.
Completely altered it. See, because Sparta's infantry was essentially unbeatable in open combat. I mean, you just didn't fight Spartans on an open field. Pericles convinced the Athenians to do something radical.
Right.
He had them abandon the entire countryside of Attica.
Which is wild to think about.
It's staggering. He forced the rural population, the farmers, the vine dressers, the shepherds, to just evacuate their ancestral lands and cram themselves behind the heavily fortified long walls that connected Athens to its port, Piraeus.
Which obviously created an unprecedented humanitarian crisis.
Massive crisis. You have this completely agrarian population suddenly living in squalid, overcrowded urban conditions.
Right. And didn't that lead to the plague?
Exactly. They are subjected to the horrors of the plague of Athens, which, wiped out a massive portion of the population, including Pericles himself, actually.
Wow. But reading the sources, it seems like perhaps the most insidious psychological torture wasn't even the disease. It was economic. It was cultural.
Oh, absolutely. Because every single year during the fighting season, the Spartan army would march into Attica and methodically destroy the agricultural foundation of the Athenian economy.
So these farmers had to literally stand on those stone walls and watch the smoke rise from their own property.
Right, in front of their eyes.
And we aren't just talking about burning a season's wheat crop, which, that's devastating enough.
Yeah, it was much worse.
They were chopping down the olive grove. They were burning the vineyards. And, an olive tree takes, decades to reach full maturity?
Decades. Sometimes a whole lifetime before it's fully productive.
So destroying an orchard, that's basically an attempt at generational erasure. It's a message from the Spartans saying, we are not just taking your food this year, we are eradicating your grandchildren's inheritance.
That is a perfect way to phrase it. And the trauma of that specific agrarian loss is the beating heart of Aristophanes' play.
Yeah, you really feel that loss in the text.
You do. Because the urban elites, the politicians, the naval merchants, and specifically the weapons manufacturers, they were largely insulated from this specific type of ruin.
Right, their wealth wasn't tied up in olive trees.
Exactly. In fact, many of the demagogues were actively profiting from the ongoing conflict. So Aristophanes builds the play on this massive, festering cultural divide between the rural victims of the war and the urban beneficiaries of it.
Which brings us back to our protagonist, Trigaius. He is the embodiment of that rural exhaustion.
The ultimate fed-up farmer.
Exactly. He is not a general. He's not a politician. He's literally just a guy who wants to prune his vines and eat his figs in peace.
He's the voice of the politically disenfranchised commoner.
Yeah, but Aristophanes doesn't just have him walk out on stage and give a sad, moving speech about how hard life is. He uses a literary device called paratragedy to turn Trigaius' desperation into this weaponized critique of the Athenian elite.
And the Athenian audience sitting there in the theater of Dionysus, they would have instantly recognized the architectural scaffolding of this joke.
Oh, for sure. It was a very specific cultural reference.
Highly specific. Aristophanes is directly hijacking the plot of a famous tragedy by his contemporary, Euripides, a play called Bellerophon.
Okay, remind us what happens in Bellerophon.
So in that tragedy, the noble hero, Bellerophon, rides this majestic winged horse, Pegasus, all the way up to the heavens to confront the gods. It is the absolute height of elite, high art hubris.
Right, it's very serious, very lofty.
Extremely lofty. So Aristophanes takes that myth and strips it of all its dignity.
He just completely trashes it.
He really does. He takes the lofty, aristocratic idealism that the politicians used to justify the war, all those soaring speeches about Athenian glory and honor, and he forcefully drags it into the barnyard.
Pegasus, the majestic winged horse, becomes a creature that literally consumes waste.
Yes, a literal dung beetle.
And the noble warrior becomes this dirt-stained, grumpy farmer. He's saying the high-minded philosophies of the generals have turned Greece into an absolute sewer.
Right.
And if you're living in a sewer, the only thing that can navigate it is a dung beetle.
It is a profound subversion of the heroic ascent. The play is arguing, right to the audience's face, that elite ideology has failed spectacularly.
Salvation is not going to come from the top down.
Never. It requires the earthy, grounded, and frankly ridiculous pragmatism of the working class.
And the flight sequence itself is just full of meta humor. Trigaius is actually terrified.
He's clinging for dear life.
Yeah, his little daughters run out before he takes off, and they're begging him not to go. They warn him that if he falls and breaks his neck, Euripides will just turn his death into another depressing tragedy.
Which is such a great inside joke for the theater crowd.
It's brilliant. And then while he's flying, Trigaius is literally yelling at the audience down below to stop going to the bathroom. Because he's terrified the beetle will catch the scent and nosedive back to Earth.
It's pure slapstick, but with a deeply serious undercurrent.
Right. So he finally breaches the dome of Olympus. He knocks on the door of heaven, and he's expecting to find this majestic pantheon of gods.
But he doesn't.
No. Instead, he just finds Hermes, the messenger god, acting as this solitary, grumpy caretaker.
The divine abandonment is absolute. Hermes explains that Zeus and the rest of the Olympians have literally packed up their furniture and relocated to the furthest, highest vault of the heavens.
They just moved out.
They moved out. They were exhausted by the constant noise of the Greeks fighting down below, and they were enraged by the Greeks continually rejecting peace treaties out of sheer stubbornness and greed.
So the gods have essentially barricaded themselves away to avoid looking at the mess humanity has made.
Exactly. Which introduces one of the darkest and honestly most brilliant metaphors in the entire text.
Oh, the mortar scene.
Yes, the gods didn't just leave an empty house when they moved upstairs. They leased the space out to a demon named War. Polemos.
And Trigaius hides and watches as War emerges, carrying this colossal mortar. Right, like the kind of massive stone bowl you'd use for grinding herbs or grain.
Right, but War isn't grinding grain. He is preparing to grind the Greek city-states into a bloody paste.
It's such a terrifying image. And Aristophanes assigns specific ingredients to specific cities, which is fascinating. They aren't random culinary choices.
Not at all. They are sharp geopolitical realities.
Break those down for us.
So War throws in leeks, and as he does it, he shouts about the destruction of Prasea.
Which was a real town.
Yes, a town known for its leek production that had been recently ravaged in the fighting. Then he throws in garlic to represent Megara.
Now, Megara is a crucial inclusion here, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely central. The Athenians had passed the Megarian decree, which was essentially a crippling economic embargo against Megara.
Right, and that embargo helped trigger the entire Peloponnesian War in the first place.
Exactly. So when war throws Megaran garlic into the mortar to be pulverized, Aristophanes is forcing the Athenian audience to look at their own complicity. He's saying you helped prepare the ingredients for your own destruction.
Wow, that is heavy for a comedy.
It gets heavier. He adds cheese for Sicily, representing the brewing conflicts that would later become the completely disastrous Sicilian expedition. And finally, he pours in Attic honey to represent Athens itself.
The imagery there just reduces the complex, supposedly glorious military maneuvers of the last decade into this blind, mechanical, thoughtless process of culinary butchery. The cities are just raw materials for a demon's dinner.
That's all they are to war. But then the tension breaks in this really darkly comedic way when War realizes he cannot actually finish the recipe.
Because he's missing his pestle.
Right. He sends his servant, whose name is Tumult, to fetch the Athenian pestle. Tumult runs off, comes back, and announces that the Athenians have lost their pestle, the tanner who ground grease to powder.
And that's a direct reference to Cleon, right?
Yes, Cleon. He was the populist, fiercely pro-war Athenian leader.
So War demands the Spartan pestle instead.
And Tumult runs off again and returns with the news that the Spartans lent theirs to the Thracians and it too is lost.
Which represents Brasidas.
Exactly. Brasidas, the brilliant, highly aggressive Spartan general. And the historical context here is key. Both of these men, the two primary architects of the war's continuation, were killed in the exact same engagement, the Battle of Amphipolis, just months before this play was performed.
So Trygaeus, cowering in the shadows up in heaven, realizes the magnitude of what he is hearing. Both the warmongers are dead.
The demon of war literally lacks the tools to crush the cities.
Right. There is this microscopic, fleeting window of opportunity before War can manufacture a new pestle. And Trygaeus learns from Hermes that the goddess of peace Eirene hasn't just fled.
No, War has buried her alive.
He threw her at the bottom of a deep pit and sealed it with massive bottles.
And this specific historical moment, we're talking March of 421 BCE, is what anthropologists call a liminal space.
Explain that for us.
Well, the audience sitting in the theater watching this unfold, they know that Cleon and Brasidas are dead in real life. They know that tentative negotiations are happening right now, negotiations that would actually culminate in the peace of Mysius merely weeks later.
So the air in the city must have been thick with this fragile, desperate hope, just mixed with profound exhaustion.
Absolutely palpable. Which brings us to the core action of the play. And this is where the scholarly linguistic analysis we're pulling from becomes absolutely fascinating.
Oh, I love this part.
Yeah.
Because if the gods have washed their hands of the situation and peace is buried under literal boulders, Trygaeus can't just, offer a sacrifice and wait for a miracle.
No, the theology of this specific universe demands physical action.
And this is where we apply SFL, right? Systemic Functional Linguistics.
Yes, specifically utilizing Constantine Campbell's framework on verbal aspect in ancient Greek.
Which sounds super intimidating, but it's actually incredible once you break it down. Because SFL doesn't just look at what words mean in a dictionary. It examines how grammatical choices construct a reality and position the listener within that reality.
Exactly. So let's focus on verbal aspect. You're reading this 2,400-year-old text. How does the shifting of a single verb tense change the neurological and emotional experience of the audience?
It's like linguistic mind control.
It kind of is. In Greek, verbal aspect is less about the strict timeline of past, present, or future, and more about the author's chosen viewpoint of the action. The best analogy is a camera lens.
Kind of like that.
When Aristophanes discusses the origins of the Peloponnesian War or the actions of the politicians who caused the suffering, he predominantly uses the aorist tense.
And the aorist tense is perfective.
Right. It views an action as a complete, self-contained whole from a distance.
And so he is using a wide-angle lens.
Yeah.
He is linguistically boxing up the trauma of the last 10 years and pushing it away. He's subtly telling the audience, look, that era of destruction is a closed chapter. It is remote. It is something we are actively moving away from.
Precisely. But the moment the play shifts to the logistical effort of rescuing the goddess Peace from the pit, the grammar violently pivots.
It completely changes.
Aristophanes overwhelms the text with present and perfect tenses. In Campbell's model, these are imperfective tenses. They generate heightened proximity. The camera lens zooms in rapidly.
So you are no longer looking at a photograph of a past event. You are suddenly inside a live feed of an unfolding crisis.
The action becomes immediate, incomplete, and highly urgent. Aristophanes is linguistically hacking the audience's perception.
He really is. He is transforming them from passive victims of a distant war into active participants in a present rescue mission. The grammar itself creates this sense of breathless exertion.
And that exertion culminates in what's called the agon, the central struggle or contest of the play.
Right, the tug-of-war scene. Trygaeus calls down from heaven to the audience, summoning all the Greeks, the farmers, the merchants, the artisans, to bring shovels, ropes, and pulleys.
They attach these massive ropes to the boulders covering the pit and initiate this pan-Hellenic tug-of-war to physically haul the goddess out of the earth.
And the scene is just masterfully chaotic. Hermes acts like the coxswain on a rowing team, screaming at them to heave, but the ropes keep going slack.
Because Aristophanes uses the physical mechanics of the tug-of-war to expose the political hypocrisy of all the different Greek factions.
Break down who's on the rope.
Well, the Archives are standing by the rope, but they aren't pulling at all. They are just laughing and accepting bribes from both sides.
Classic.
Then the Spartans are trying to pull, but their Athenian prisoners of war are chained to the ropes, creating a counterweight. The Megarians are pulling with all their might, but the text explicitly notes they are too starved from the trade embargoes to generate any actual force.
And then you have the weapons manufacturers.
Right. They're digging their heels in and actively pulling in the exact opposite direction. They desperately need the war to continue to maintain their profit margins.
Unbelievable. And within SFL, this brings up the ideational metafunction, right?
Yes, the ideational metafunction. This concept explores how language represents human experience through different types of processes. And during this entire tug-of-war sequence, the text is utterly saturated with what linguists call material processes.
Verbs of physical labor.
Exactly. Hauling, dragging, sweating, digging, pulling.
Okay, I want to stop right there and just push back on the philosophical implications of this for a second.
Yeah, go for it.
Because we're analyzing this text to find connections to our Christian faith, right? That's the goal.
Yeah.
But looking at this specific scene, the ancient Greek concept of peace seems profoundly cynical.
How so?
Well, if shalom, or Eirene in Greek, is nothing more than a heavy material object that you literally drag out of the mud through brute human geopolitical engineering, doesn't that strip peace of any moral or divine significance? I mean, the gods aren't dispensing justice here. They just left because the noise gave them a headache.
That is the crucial limitation of the Greek cosmological imagination, and it is exactly why this place serves as a shadow rather than the substance.
Why?
You are entirely correct. Aristophanes is not envisioning a moral regeneration of the human heart, nor is he relying on a benevolent deity to restore order. The peace of Athens is an achievement of human pragmatism, born out of the sheer exhaustion of resources.
So if you want peace in this worldview, you basically have to engineer it yourself.
Yes. Trygaeus eventually figures this out. He looks at the chaotic tug-of-war and realizes the politicians and the merchants will never, ever pull in the same direction.
So what does he do?
He kicks everyone off the rope, except the Georgoi, the farmers, the husbandmen. When only the agricultural class, the people most intimately connected to the land and the ones who suffer most from its destruction, pull together, the goddess is finally freed.
Wow. And the linguistic analysis tracks this shift beautifully. Because the exact moment peace is out of the pit, the grammar shifts away from those heavy material processes to what are called relational processes.
Right. The language moves from describing grueling action to describing states of being.
The dialogue suddenly focuses on what is. The fields are ripe. The festivals are returning. The air is sweet. It's like the grammar itself just exhales.
It really does. And Aristophanes immediately sets about establishing the winners and losers of this new reality. In the Exodos, which are the concluding scenes of the play, Trygaeus is preparing for a massive wedding feast to celebrate his marriage to Opera, the goddess of the harvest. And this parade of merchants arrives at his farm, and we get to see the economic inversion of peace.
I love this part. Tell us about the sickle maker.
So the sickle maker arrives, and he is ecstatic. During the war, he couldn't sell an agricultural tool for a single obol. Now he's selling sickles for 50 drachmae apiece. The agrarian economy is just roaring back to life.
But then the armorers arrive.
Yes.
The crest maker, the guy who fashioned those elaborate horsehair plumes for the infantry helmets, he approaches Trygaeus and wails that his livelihood is completely ruined.
And Trygaeus is just merciless.
Totally ruthless. A breastplate maker brings in this beautifully crafted, incredibly expensive bronze cuirass, lamenting that his masterpiece is now entirely worthless. And Trigeus offers to buy it at a steep discount to use as a night stool.
A toilet.
A literal toilet. The merchant is obviously insulted, but Trigeus explains the physical mechanics of how he'll prop the armor on 3 stones and use the armholes for leverage.
It is highly crass, yes, but the underlying commentary is razor sharp. The tools of human slaughter are systematically humiliated. They are stripped of their martial glory and repurposed for the lowest forms of domestic civilian utility.
He does the exact same thing with the spear maker, right?
Yeah.
He offers to buy his beautifully balanced weapons just to snap them in half and use them as stakes to prop up his grapevines.
Yes.
And this image right here, taking a spear and turning it into a vine prop, this is the exact moment this ancient Greek comedy violently collides with the Hebrew prophets.
We are crossing the intertextual bridge. The thematic and visual parallels between Aristophanes' body political satire and the majestic divine oracles of Isaiah and Micah are just staggering.
It really is wild. Listen to the resonance here. Aristophanes has a farmer repurposing spears for a vineyard. Meanwhile, Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4 declares, "They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore."
And Micah chapter 4 replicates that exact promise, but adds the specific agrarian detail that literally obsesses Trigeus. Micah 4.4 says, "Everyone will sit under their own vine and under their own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid." Think about it. Throughout the entire Greek play, Trigeus's primary motivation is to go back to his rural deme, caress his fig trees, and live without the terror of a Spartan invasion.
It's incredible. You have 2 completely distinct ancient cultures, the Athenians living in the shadow of the Acropolis, and the Hebrews living in the shadow of Mount Zion.
Worlds apart.
Worlds apart. Yet they share the exact same visceral, desperate dream. It proves that the longing for a world where the instruments of death are transformed into the tools of cultivation is just baked into the very DNA of humanity.
Yeah.
It is a universal echo of Eden.
It is. However, the deep scholarly analysis of the Old Testament texts reveals the profound theological chasm between these two visions.
Yeah, they sound the same on the surface, but underneath.
Underneath, they share the vocabulary of peace, but their grammar of salvation is entirely opposed.
Right. To put it in architectural terms, Aristophanes is describing the scaffolding of peace, the economic conditions, the treaties, the mere absence of active violence. But the Old Testament is describing the foundational bedrock of peace, the moral and spiritual alignment of creation with its creator.
That is a very precise distinction. Let's examine the etiology of the transformation, like why are the weapons actually being repurposed?
Okay, let's look at that.
In Aristophanes, as we saw with the armorers, the spears become vine props purely due to economic utility and social shaming. The geopolitical market has shifted. War is no longer a viable business model, so the merchants are forced to adapt or starve.
So it is a purely pragmatic, horizontal solution.
Exactly. But in the Old Testament, swords are not beaten into plowshares because of market forces. They are transformed because of divine instruction. They're transformed by the Torah.
Look at the structural movement of Isaiah 2 and Micah 4. The prophetic oracle doesn't begin with humanity figuring out a clever way to pull peace out of the earth.
No, not at all.
It begins with a massive, sovereign, centrifugal event, the exaltation of Zion. It says, "In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it."
The movement is entirely different. In the Greek play, the nations are scattered, sweating, trying to haul peace down to them. In Isaiah, the nations are streaming up the mountain.
Right.
And they are saying, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths."
And the Hebrew verb used for beating the swords into plowshares is the ekitu, right?
Yes, ekititu. It implies a forceful, deliberate, violent reshaping of the metal. But that metallurgical transformation only occurs after the nations have submitted themselves to Yahweh's arbitration.
He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples.
Exactly. In Aristophanes, peace is a lucky break achieved by a trickster who circumvented the gods. In the biblical prophets, peace is a cosmic, orchestrated event led by the sovereign God. The repurposing of weapons is merely the secondary byproduct of the primary act, submitting to divine justice.
which means the two traditions diagnose the fundamental problem of war completely differently.
Completely.
In the Greek mind, strife exists because the gods are annoyed by the noise of humanity and simply walk away, leaving a power vacuum that gets filled by a demon. War is treated almost like a tragic geopolitical accident, or just a failure of diplomacy.
But the Old Testament rejects that premise entirely. God does not withdraw because he is tired of the noise.
Right.
War, strife, and destruction are the direct, inevitable symptoms of the deeper disease of human rebellion, injustice, and idolatry. Therefore, the cure cannot possibly be a temporary treaty signed by exhausted politicians.
It requires a fundamental change in human nature, guided by divine instruction.
Exactly. Which propels us into the canonical imagination of the New Testament.
Yes. If the Hebrew prophets diagnose the deep disease of the human heart, the New Testament introduces the ultimate healer. So how does analyzing the absurd ascent of Tregeus on his dung beetle actually eliminate our understanding of Jesus Christ?
It provides a breathtaking contrast in the theology of mediation. The entire premise of Aristophanes' play rests on a heavenly journey. Tregeus acts as a mediator for the suffering Greeks by ascending into the divine realm.
But his mediation is a complete farce.
Yeah, totally.
He rides an insect that eats excrement. He relies on a parodic trick to force his way into the presence of an apathetic heaven. He succeeds because the gods are negligent, not because he is holy.
Now overlay that shadow with the substance found in the book of Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 4 details Christ's high priestly ascension. The writer says, "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess."
The contrast there is magnificent. Tregeus ascends to an empty house, terrified the whole time that Zeus will hurl a thunderbolt at him.
Right, he's shaking in his boots.
But Jesus does not use a trick to infiltrate a silent heaven. He is the eternal Son who willingly descended into the muck and filth of the human condition.
He came down to us.
Exactly. He absorbed the ultimate violence of the world on the cross, conquered death, and legitimately ascended to the right hand of the Father.
Jesus secures eternal peace not by pulling a buried goddess out of the dirt with a rope, but by offering his own perfect blood. Because of his authentic, victorious mediation, Hebrews tells us we can approach God's throne of grace with confidence.
Tregeus approached with terror. We approach with the assurance of adopted children.
Understanding the poverty of the Greek imagination makes the riches of Christ's mediation infinitely more beautiful.
It really does. But let's press into the nature of the piece itself for a moment.
Yes.
Because at the end of the play, Tregeus gets exactly what he wants. He is throwing this massive wedding feast. He is marrying the goddess of the harvest. There is wine, roasted meat, music, and the promise of a quiet life on the farm.
Sounds idyllic.
Right. And if we are honest from a practical standpoint, isn't that earthly political peace highly desirable? Isn't a world without war and with full stomachs exactly what Christians are praying for?
It is a profound, necessary good, yes, but it is a penultimate good. It is not the ultimate reality.
Let's expand on that.
The theological critique of our sources highlights a vital distinction. Aristophanes is celebrating a peace of exhaustion. It is a temporary pan-Hellenic ceasefire. The city stopped fighting because they literally ran out of money, manpower, and political will.
And history proves how fragile that is, right?
Completely. The Peace of Nicaea, which this play anticipated, completely collapsed. Within a few years, the war resumed with even greater ferocity, culminating in the total destruction of the Athenian Empire.
Earthly treaties signed by sinful humans are written in sand.
Exactly. The New Testament, however, introduces a concept of peace, Eirene, that operates on a completely different ontological level. Romans 5.1 declares, "Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ."
True biblical peace is not merely the absence of military conflict or the presence of agricultural abundance. It is an objective status of reconciliation with the Creator.
It is an internal reality that produces external fruit. And Ephesians chapter 2 expands this beyond the individual to the entire cosmos. Paul writes that Christ himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, to create in himself one new humanity.
Consider the contrast there. Aristophanes' ultimate vision of peace is pan-Hellenism. It is all the Greek city-states putting aside their differences to unite in their shared cultural superiority, usually in opposition to the barbarians outside Greece.
Right, it is an exclusive ethnocentric peace.
But Jesus obliterates that paradigm. The cross doesn't just unite warring factions within a single culture. It destroys the very concept of ethnic and national division before God.
The new humanity forged in Christ includes the Greek and the barbarian, the Athenian and the Spartan, the Jew and the Gentile.
The cross doesn't negotiate a treaty. It assassinates the hostility itself.
This is the ultimate dynamic of the shadow and the substance. The wedding feast at the end of Aristophanes' piece is a gorgeous, deeply human shadow. It taps into the right longing. Humanity is meant for restoration, for feasting, for rest, for the end of anxiety.
But the play relies on a fraudulent mediator and settles for a temporary geopolitical pause. The substance that casts that ancient shadow is the marriage supper of the Lamb described in Revelation 19.
The play provides the desperate human grammar of hope. The New Testament provides the divine reality that fulfills that hope for eternity.
Which leads us to a vital methodological question regarding how we as modern believers engage with culture.
This is an important pivot.
Because we're sitting here today mining deep theological truths from a pagan comedy full of polytheism and scatological humor. How did the early church, who lived surrounded by these texts and this culture, how did they handle this literature? Did they simply burn the scrolls because they were pagan?
Not at all. The early church fathers utilized a highly sophisticated intellectual framework. Men like Clement of Alexandria, Justin Martyr, and Augustine practiced what was called spoliatio Egyptiorum, the spoiling of the Egyptians.
I love this concept.
It is an analogy drawn from the Exodus. When the Israelites left Egypt, God instructed them to take the gold and silver of their captors. They later melted down that pagan Egyptian wealth to construct the elements of the tabernacle for the worship of Yahweh.
Church fathers believed they could do the exact same thing with classical philosophy and literature.
Yes. They took the intellectual gold of the Greco-Roman world, stripped it of its idolatry, and repurposed it to articulate Christian truth.
Clement of Alexandria was an absolute master at this. He didn't ignore plays like Peace. He weaponized them for Christian apologetics.
He really did. Clement argued that if you want to see the bankruptcy of paganism, you don't need to read a Christian sermon. Just read the Greeks' own beloved playwrights.
Clement pointed out the profound theological self-sabotage in these comedies. Aristophanes puts a play on stage where the supreme gods are depicted as petty, noise-hating cowards who just abandoned humanity to a demon.
And he depicts Hermes as a corrupt middleman who accepts a bribe of a golden cup and some sacrificial meat just to help Trigeus subvert the divine will.
So Clement essentially turns to the pagan world and says, look at what you applaud in your own theaters. You know inherently that your gods are capricious, corrupt, and ultimately useless in the face of human suffering. Why are you bowing down to deities that your own poets mock?
Come and worship the one true creator who cannot be bribed, who does not flee from the noise of human pain, but who enters directly into it to save us. It is a devastatingly effective apologetic maneuver.
And then we look at Augustine, writing The City of God centuries later, as the Roman Empire itself was collapsing. Augustine deals extensively with this tension between the earthly desire for stability and the eternal reality of the kingdom.
He does. He analyzes the exact kind of peace Aristophanes celebrates. The peace of the harvest, political security, the safety of the city walls.
And Augustine doesn't dismiss that earthly peace as worthless, does he? He doesn't tell Christians to just detach from society and wait for heaven.
No, Augustine provides a highly nuanced validation of it. He argues that the earthly peace of the city of man is a genuine good. Christians should desire it, pray for it, and actively work to maintain it.
Because that stability provides the necessary conditions for human flourishing, for raising families, and for the church to operate.
Exactly. However, he radically subordinates it.
He strips it of its ultimate authority.
Yes. He warns that earthly peace is always penultimate. It is a fragile, temporary ceasefire maintained by the threat of force. It can never satisfy the deepest longings of the human soul.
Right.
Augustine contrasts it with what he calls the tranquillitas ordinis, the tranquility of order. This is the eternal, perfectly aligned, unbreakable peace of the city of God, where every element of creation is in joyous, perfectly ordered submission to the love of the Creator.
So bringing all of this historical, linguistic, and theological weight to bear on our own lives, how does this deep dive actively deepen a Christian's faith today?
That's the real question.
Our sources suggest that engaging with a text like this cultivates what is called a canonical imagination.
A canonical imagination trains the believer to look at the chaotic, often terrifying events of the modern world and interpret them through the overarching narrative of Scripture. When you develop this imagination, you begin to see the patterns of ancient Athens repeating in your own society.
We look around our world today and we see the exact same frantic, human-centric efforts to engineer peace.
Yeah.
We see massive geopolitical treaties that fall apart within months.
Just like the Peace of Naces.
Exactly. We see an absolute obsession with technological salvation. The idea that if we just invent the right algorithm or the right energy source, we can eradicate human suffering. We see endless streams of self-help gurus promising internal tranquility if you just buy their book or follow their 10-step program.
And possessing a canonical imagination allows you to recognize those modern efforts for what they truly are. They're contemporary versions of a desperate farmer trying to ride a dung beetle into the sky.
We are still building absurd, homemade vehicles out of our own ingenuity, our wealth, and our politics, trying to force the universe to yield a peace that it is fundamentally incapable of providing on its own.
Recognizing that futility is not meant to drive us to cynicism or despair, though.
No, not at all. It is meant to drive us to absolute awe and profound gratitude for Christ. Reading the desperation of Aristophanes' world highlights the miraculous security of the Christian's reality.
We possess an eternal, internal shalom that is anchored entirely outside the fluctuating circumstances of history.
Our peace does not depend on which political party holds power, or the current stability of the global economy, or the success of the latest diplomatic summit.
We have journeyed from the filth of a farmyard in 421 BCE, through the intricate grammar of human desperation, across the prophetic visions of Isaiah and Micah, to arrive at the staggering reality of the ascended Christ.
We have seen that the universal human cry for rest, for the vine and the fig tree, cannot be answered by hauling a silent goddess out of the mud.
It is only answered by God himself, stepping down into the mud, taking on our flesh, absorbing our hostility, and rising to secure our eternal reconciliation.
This theology demands practical application. Because your peace is secure in Christ, because your eternal status is settled, you are liberated from the frantic anxiety that consumes the world.
You are freed to be an active, ethical peacemaker in your community, in your workplace, and in your family right now.
You can labor for the necessary good of earthly peace without making it an idol, because you know the substance of ultimate peace is already guaranteed.
You can deeply enjoy the common grace of a quiet afternoon in your backyard while keeping your heart firmly fixed on the ultimate joy of the approaching marriage supper of the Lamb.
We want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to turn over in your mind as you navigate the complexities of this week. Think back to the sheer absurdity of Trigos's chosen vehicle of salvation.
That giant insect.
Right. If our modern culture were to write a brutally honest comedy about our own desperate, exhausting search for peace today, what kind of dung beetle are we currently trying to ride to heaven? What are the absurd, ultimately powerless human constructs that your neighbors, or perhaps even you, are putting ultimate hope in? And most importantly, as you encounter people who are exhausted and terrified by the constant failure of those earthly vehicles, how can you, with profound grace and love, point them toward the true, unfailing, and glorious ascent of Jesus Christ?